Dr. Nick Fairbridge, and welcome to today's session on municipal regulations as part of our discussion of how to grow more local food. One of my goals throughout this section is to try and convince every community to be a little bit more like where I live, the community of Harbor, Maine, Trappist Cove, Lakeview. So this gorgeous shot is just showing off our community, but more importantly, our community is one of the most permissive places to homesteading and residential agriculture in the entire province. So in order to understand how we got here and what it means to be open at a municipal level to agriculture, I'd like to start at a blank slate. So anyone who is focused in on providing or starting new projects and all the great ideas we're discussing throughout this conference really can run into significant barriers to implementing those ideas at the municipal level. So this is going to focus more on homesteading and local production than necessarily the large commercial regulations, but I would like to talk about and map out what we need to be aware of. So I think most folks are aware of municipal bylaws. So these are brought in under the Authority to Municipalities Act, and in the animal context is mostly animal control bylaws. So to licensing, to leashes, things of that nature. But separate from that is development regulations and the paired town plan. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about the town plan, but the development regulations are really key to everything we're interested in and end up being a major barrier across our whole province. But they're not just another bylaw. They actually come out of the Urban and Rural Planning Act. Municipalities can register their development regulations under that act. And that means changing those regulations is not the same as changing a bylaw. There's a few more steps, but it is possible. And I would like to talk about in our discussions how we can encourage amendments and improvement to development regulations. So as part of my project, I sat down with every single set of development regulations across the entire province. So that was 160 development regulations, 160 town plans, and endless number of amendments and bylaws related to agriculture. And I tried to review all of them to understand what is the state of provincial regulations at a local level. And the answer is it's not good. Most communities highly restrict agricultural practices, especially in residential areas. And really, we frame at a provincial level almost all of our municipal regulations on a definition, a functional understanding of agriculture that predates Confederation. So before we get into that in any depth, there are a few other acts of legislation we need to be aware of. So the Farm Practices and Protection Act, when this act was brought in, the intention was to help protect food growers and livestock, those who raise livestock, from complaints of nuisance and associated liability. And one of the things that act of legislation explicitly states is that they are meant to be exempt from municipal bylaws and noise ordinance or nuisance ordinance related to their activities, so long as they follow standard best practice. One of the issues, however, is that there's a pretty big loophole in that, yes, that protection exists if you're allowed to perform agriculture in the first place, but communities can really sidestep those protections by changing development regulations and simply in those regulations which are not protected, excluding either certain types of animals, such as roosters, or whole classes or types of agriculture entirely and exclude them from the communities. And that means those protections really don't apply if your development regulations don't allow you to start those activities to begin with. The other piece, just to be aware of, because it's, I think, a major concern or a major draw of resources at the municipal level, is the Animal Health and Protection Act. So that act does many things, but two of them worth noting is broadly animal welfare and nuisance animals. So when a goat gets loose and destroys someone else's garden, what happens and how do you respond? Well, many of our smaller communities who cannot afford a municipal enforcement officer really don't have any way to follow up on these concerns. And at least within my community, these two categories make up a significant portion of the complaints or concerns brought forward to town council. So a lot of the clerk's time and much of the council's time is taken up trying to address these when they really don't have the resources to effectively address them. And if we could find a way to help smaller communities with these concerns, I would like to think some of the barriers at a municipal level could potentially be overcome. But one of the important things that really ties together the more recent acts of legislation is that both the Animal Health Protection Act and the Farm Practices Protection Act and their associated regulations really tie everything or build it all upon the idea of promoting the codes of practice and standard best practice. And a major gap currently within our development regulations is that that doesn't exist. So across 160 current regulations that I reviewed, none of them, so zero, actually referenced modern or current or any codes of practice and standard practice as the foundation to set the regulations. And so there's a big gap there in that if our policy and regulations aren't evidence-based, if they're not actually able to source industry experts, because these codes of practice are national or even international experts, industry experts, ethics, everyone's come together. They've already established this code. It should be enough to simply reference and say, we need to be promoting and holding these codes, and then we can get rid of all the micromanaging or over-regulation of one species versus another, whether you're promoting horticulture or whether you're looking at livestock. The only thing we should be concerned with is whether or not those activities are following standard practice and the codes of practice. So having reviewed those, there's a few high-level recommendations I might put forward. If we were to try and establish a new way forward for municipal regulations, I've stolen this wording from the province. It's no way sanctified, but perhaps we can get there. So as I mentioned, at a municipal regulation, I really think all of them, all 160, should base their regulations on standard practice and codes of practice within the agricultural field. And that would help tie in and support evidence-based policy and decision-making. So there's so many things in the current regulations, such as communities that say a new farm has to be at least 600 meters away from any existing residence. I don't know where that number came from currently, perhaps someone in the audience does, but that is passed on throughout a number of the regulations in the province. But what that really means when you do the math, that's 144 hectares of land required with a barn in the middle for a farm to secure. And that's actually a larger area than a half dozen communities using that regulation. So what those communities have really said is that new farming and agriculture is simply non-compliant and not allowed within the community. They just haven't actually said or addressed that. But where that comes from, how do we base it on a more realistic and modern guideline? That's where province, I think, really has a role, because I think councils need more guidance on what sort of legislation and what they should be framing the regulations on. As I mentioned, there's also a number of current regulations that are directly contradicting the Farm Practices Protection Act, directly saying that livestock may be allowed only if they pose no nuisance, even though that flies directly in the face of the Farm Practice Protection Act. And so that should be repealed and taken out. I think we can also look to our communities that are currently very open to agriculture. So there's a number throughout the province, such as Aquaford, Harbour Main, Trappist Cove, Lakeview, and Bay Roberts, that are fully permissive to residential agriculture. And life goes on, life is thriving. And I think every community can learn from their example and look to them to where the barriers, where the resources, and what issues could be overcome. I think every community also needs, especially the smaller ones that cannot afford enforcement officers, need more supports in addressing animal welfare concerns and nuisance animals. And finally, I'd like to give credit to Bay Roberts, Grand Falls, Windsor, Spaniers Bay, and Bishop Falls for finding a truly innovative approach to the regulations that both streamlines agricultural regulations and really sets up a framework that I think every municipality should be using. And that's an accessory land use class to small-scale agriculture within the municipal development regulations. So I'm going to post this. I'm not going to go through any detail. My suggested amendments, based on what already exists in these 4 communities and what already exists in the legislation, of how we could streamline municipal regulations, put these 2 new terms within the definition section, and then really take out almost every other condition or limitation to agriculture and frame all of it on standard best practice, which really should be our start. So I'm hoping to have a great discussion, looking forward to questions, and I'll see you soon. Thanks.
Good day, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to speak at the Regeneration Soil Food Community. I am the coordinator for the Miawpukek Community Garden here on the Miawpukek First Nation Reservation in Newfoundland, also known as Conn River. I'll briefly share where our Indigenous gardening program is taking place and the accompaniment of blending modern ideas of gardening with traditional culture as we promote healing and well-being during times of uncertainty. Miawpukek First Nation is a remote community that is interested in gardening as one strategy to improve food security while adapting to climate change. The program officially began in 2017 when a group of academics from University of Toronto and Memorial University of Newfoundland, Megan, Tanu, and Lim, studying climate adaptive food security initiative, came to Miawpukek First Nation. Additionally, from 2018 to 2020, Food First NL supported our community-led food assessment and a pilot garden program at the Nutrition Center and daycare. These pilot gardens and assessments with Food First NL were helpful as we continued our partnership with University of Toronto and Memorial University to create a larger scale culturally connected community garden. This map is a plant hardiness zone map, which provides insights on what plants can grow and where. Miawpukek First Nation is influenced by maritime climate, so it's a bit warmer when compared to other northern parts of Canada, and we have lots of precipitation during our growing season, which is from June 20th to September 20th. Our area is considered a 5A plant hardiness zone, which permits a longer growing season in comparison to other areas further north. While developing the garden program, the main goal was to utilize techniques that are regionally suitable, which includes consideration of culture, socioeconomic context, and environmental conditions. One of the main and important strategies to ensure techniques are regionally suitable is to have techniques that harmonize with indigenous knowledge and land-based activities that occur in the region. In 2019, I became the community-based garden coordinator, and we had 2 growing seasons so far. When I accepted the coordinator position for the development and management of the Melbourne Community Garden, there was no developed land to permanently host the community garden. As such, I had to coordinate with several departments to develop the garden to what it is now. I should also add that before I took the job, I did not have much gardening experience to work from. However, I felt that with the changing climate, conditions happening around us, and food challenges occurring everywhere, it was important for my community to adapt to climate change while improving food security in my community. Just to be clear, Miawpukek First Nation is located in Newfoundland, and because we are a province surrounded by water, this province has to have 90% of its food shipped by ferry, whether fresh or non-perishable, thus creating insecurities within this province. In most small communities, there is only one grocery store. According to Food First NL, we have only about 2 or 3 days worth of fresh vegetables if the food supply chain was disrupted. Newfoundland does offer some agriculture, but mainly consists of root vegetables. With that being said, we do not have a strong agricultural presence. However, though more recently with increasing temperatures and advances in technology, Province Newfoundland is encouraging more local food production. On its own, Melbourne Conn River has a rich food history, including fishing, trapping, small gardens, berry picking, and hunting. In a recent household survey, it was shown that more community members want locally grown fresh foods. And more importantly, they want to know how to grow their own garden foods. Melbourne is considered a remote community that is accessed by an isolated Beta Spare highway. Motorists do travel over 4 hours to and from Grand Falls, Windsor for a better selection of fresh and healthy foods. The community garden has been in the works since 2017, although breaking ground, so to speak, first occurred around October of 2019. Using the photos on the right, here's a timeline to demonstrate our progression of the 1 acre community garden. In the top right, this is what we did in 2019. We have the fence, open field, no garden beds. In October of 2020, we started constructing garden beds, which we managed to get 17 finished beds and a fire pit situated where we wanted to. That year we grew 88 kilograms of food. Then in September 2021, growing season, a total of 57 beds was dedicated to annual crops, and we grew 288 kilograms of food. Plus, we managed to create a walkway and flags in place and vegetables growing. Melbourne Community Garden is a food production, teaching, and a cultural gathering place. The design and management of the garden reflects the 4 directions of the medicine wheel teachings, which in turn represent the 4 main stages in a person's life. As part of our culture, we have included the 4 main colors: red, yellow, black, and white, which embodies the concepts such as the four directions, the four seasons, human races, and sacred paths. Starting from the top left of the garden, where the quadrant is red and working in a clockwise fashion, I'll briefly describe what each situation represents and how it was designed to operate. In the east, the classroom garden. Red is used for its border. In the Mi'kmaq culture, the east is represented by the eagle and is believed to be the symbol watching out and looking over our children as we raise and guide them into adulthood. Here in the garden, it too represents the children and youth. However, just like our school system, which runs from pre-K to grade 12, we have a raised bed for each grade and seating for an outdoor classroom so that to connect and learn from elders or guest speakers. In the south, the family garden, where yellow is used for its border. In my culture, the South is represented by the Muslim. She is the provider for our people and she reminds us to respect and honor our women. Here in the garden, which is more typical of an allotment community garden, it is organized in a row by row fashion with raised garden beds, 4 by 8 feet, to allow the family members to pick and choose their own individual garden plots. In the west, the elders' garden, black is used for its border. To the Mi'kmaq people, the west represents the great grandfathers, which is also known as the spirit world. Here in the garden, the aim is to provide an opportunity for volunteers, committee members, and all the community to grow food that will be made available to elders. Elders are welcome to contribute to all the gardening, and in the end, all of the harvest is designated for elders. In the north, the perennial garden, white is used for its border. As a member of the community, we are taught that the north represents the great white bear. It is seen as the animal that represents the strength, courage, and longevity of our people. Here in the garden, it represents the beginnings and renewal of each spring as small plants such as fruits and berries will grow on its own each year, which is why in this area we have raised gardens and in ground plants that are only perennials. At the center, in the purple circle, is a gathering circle with a fire pit which has been placed there to host community events and gatherings. Although our focus has been inside the perimeter of the garden, it is important to mention that we have amenities outside the garden that plays a pivotal role in the functioning and operation of the community garden. To our left, between the school and orchard quadrant, we have a water tower, which is gravity fed from a hill about 2,300 feet away. We also have a sea can to the south at the top of the screen and is used to store our tools, safety gear, seeds, anything we do not want left outside overnight or during the winter. As a final thought, our garden is located less than 5 minutes walking from the school, the paddle grounds, fort trails, and sports fields. As I mentioned, we are close to the school. Because of this, our students are able to use the outdoor classroom at any time during the day, weather provided. The custom-built wooden stools made right here in Conde River are made from local timber, split and mounted into the ground with middle spikes to prevent them from falling over and from being tipped over. Not sure if you can tell from the image, but there is a wider gap between the set of stools where the podium and the entrance to the southwest corner of the screen is. This is to allow the student to enter the classroom easier and to allow for those with wheelchairs to be a part of the class more easily. The podium is situated in the east because we enter the sweat lodge in the east, just as the sun rises in the east. Also, it is less likely that a teacher will have the sun in her face as he or she is teaching during school hours. A backboard was built so that a teacher can use a flip chart when teaching students. Initially, when we start the garden, we have plants for a greater number of raised beds than what we have. However, COVID hit while we were starting the construction of garden beds, and so we decided to move the garden beds further apart, from like 4 feet to 8 feet to allow for the 6-foot spacing. Here are some of the crops that we grew in the classroom, community and elder gardens. Crops that grew really well were potatoes, cabbage, turnip, and beets. We also grew cucumbers, squash, and corn, which was a riskier crop for us to grow in our climate, but they did better than expected. This slide displays some of the activities that occurred in the garden in the 2021 season while we were managing COVID-19. We were unable to have large gatherings. However, we had unemployment and volunteer opportunities. We had a daycare see the garden, and residents were able to visit the garden to see the progress, share their knowledge, and give feedback, which was very much appreciated. Here are some of the residents who had garden boxes. If a person was not comfortable with going to the garden or could not due to work restraints, we had a plan, and we were ready to do the harvest ourselves and deliver their crops for them. The north section, where we grew perennials, in the middle of the screen is a list of crops we grew at the site. Some traditional plants growing at the site include strawberries, raspberries, currants, sweetgrass, and sage. Some of the more climate adapted crops growing include apple trees and grapes. Here are photos of some additional amenities in the community garden. The water platform and storage sea can were briefly discussed earlier. We utilized low tunnels for some of the crops to improve climate growing conditions. The Capital Lands and Housing donated us mini composters for the garden and to share it among the community members as we work on building up soil fertility. Each corner of the garden has flags. These flags were inspired by feedback from one of our elders, and they are capable of flying at half mast when a member of our community passes away. Originally, an elder recommended grocery bags to deter unwanted animals in the garden. Instead of garbage bags, we used plastic tablecloths as flags to represent our traditional colors red, yellow, black, and white. And this is our fire pit in the top right corner. It can be used for community gatherings such as roasting wieners or as something to chat around. Eventually, there will be seating around the fire pit. Well, Alan, for listening to our presentation. I would like to acknowledge that the funding for this project is from CIHR, Climate Change and Health Adaptation Program, and Food First NL. And I'm thankful for all the support we have received from our research partners, and especially from Miawpukek First Nation, including Conner Rail and Social Services, and other Miawpukek departments and community members. Well, thanks everyone.
Hi, welcome to beautiful Norris Point. My name is Laurie, and together with my husband Boyd, we started Gros Morne Farm and Market. We decided to start our farm back in about 2016. My husband Boyd has always wanted to have a farm, and I was kind of the one, to say, well, I don't know how I feel about that, all these visions of, being in the middle of a cow pasture somewhere and wanting to be elsewhere. I was kind of not really wanting to start a farm, but we did always grow our own food for a while. So over the years, we did some kind of backyard gardening and, growing some tomato plants and lettuce and pepper plants and things like that. And I guess one day I kind of realized that maybe starting a farm wasn't a bad idea, especially living in rural Newfoundland. Access to fresh food was pretty much few and far in between. We noticed in, just with home gardening that we were giving a lot of our produce away to friends and family because we couldn't eat everything that we were growing. So we kind of had to sit down and realize that, it would be maybe a good adventure to start. Boyd was working away at the time, so we thought maybe also this would be a great opportunity for him to be able to stay home and do something at home. Like a lot of families in the province, he had to go away for work. So starting a farm and maybe making an income from farming was something that we were started to get excited about. So I think it was 2017, we kind of scoped out a place in Norris Point, some vacant crown land, and decided to apply for an agricultural lease in the province. We didn't realize that it was going to take us approximately 2.5 years to actually get access to that crown land for farming. So the process was quite time consuming. So we were excited. We wanted to start our farm as soon as possible. So what we did was we started farming in our backyard before we had access to our crown land. So we made some raised beds in the backyard. We put up a little makeshift greenhouse on our patio, and we started to grow food. For what we decided to do was maybe gear it to just the restaurants that were in our area at first before we started to offer it out in the community, because we were growing in such a small space. But we wanted to get our name established and out there. So we went around and we visited some of our restaurants that are in the area, and they were pretty excited about being able to purchase fresh produce and stuff that they weren't used to being able to purchase in our area, like microgreens as well. So our first year, we decided to target our restaurants in the area. And we started to grow microgreens for them and salad greens. And we quickly realized that it wasn't going to be enough space in our backyard, but we got through year one, selling a few things here and there to our restaurants. So in year two, about 2017, we decided that there was a community gardens and greenhouse at the Cottage Hospital, and they weren't being used by the community at all. And we thought, well, it's kind of laying empty over there. Maybe we should approach somebody and see if we could utilize the space. So we approached Joni Cranston, who kind of runs the Julia Ann Walsh Center here where the community greenhouse and gardens are. And she was absolutely delighted that we were taking an interest in what we were doing, and she offered it to the space to us. And eventually we actually formed a partnership with them, which gave us access to employees that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to have access to. So we did form a partnership. So we used in year two the community greenhouse, which is where we are now, and the gardens. So we planted our salad greens in the gardens here. And we had more room for, greenhouse crops like peppers and tomatoes and all of our starts as well. So we utilized that, which helped us grow a little bit in the following years. We still hadn't had access to our land, I believe, until the very late part of 2018. So 2017 and 2018, by using the community garden and greenhouse, really helped us to up our production for those couple of years. But we decided again that come 2019, 2020, that we needed quite a lot more space than what, we had access to. So we decided to see if they maybe had an extra room in the Cottage Hospital for us to be able to, put up vertical growing systems. So again, delighted that we were going to use some space here. They decided to give us some extra room, and we put up some vertical growing spaces that we have all of our plant starts inside, and we're able to get them in a little bit earlier than we were if we had to put them out here in the greenhouse. So come on in and have a look, and we'll take a look at our growing space inside. Well, welcome to our growing space here in the Cottage Hospital. This is where we keep, this is actually where we start all of our plants and seed everything here in this room. And these are our vertical growing shelves. And we do a lot of our transplanting and seeding in here for all of our crops on the farm. It's given us, extra time at the beginning of the season to be able to grow some things indoors, so we have them a little bit later stage going out into the field. Without this space, we couldn't do the production that we're doing. So as I said earlier, we started targeting restaurants in the beginning, and that's kind of all we offered, was just to the restaurants. And as our space has grown, we were able to grow as well. So now we offer a 50-box CSA members to the community. People come from Cowhead to come pick up their boxes. They come from across the bay, from Woody Point to get boxes, and here in Norris Point and Rocky Harbor as well. So we're serving, not only Norris Point and our community here, but the surrounding communities as well in Gros Morne area. So this year, we're hoping to have an increase in boxes as well, CSA boxes. So I think we're looking at probably between 50 and 75 boxes for this season coming up. Okay, so we're now here at our farm in the greenhouse. We have two 30 by 50 unheated greenhouses that we use to grow tomatoes and peppers in. But early in the season, we're growing early greens in here before we put our tomatoes and our peppers in. We have 26 acres in total. And in 2018, when we gained access to our farm, we were able to get a little bit of land cleared. And in 2019, we started on our farm with about 1 acre cleared and 1 plot that we were able to plant out in 2019. And in 2020, we ended up with 4 plots that we were able to plant. And last year in 2021, we were able to have up our beds to, I think we have 8 or 9 plots and about 200 raised beds. So we do permanent raised beds on our farm, and we do a no-till system where we just fork the beds and amend them and plant into them again the following year. So last year in the fall, we were able to get another 2 acres cleared. So we have a total of about 4 acres cleared and ready to amend and plant on the farm for this year. So it's a pretty big jump from last year, but we're up for the challenge. I hope you enjoyed the tour of our farm and what we're all about here in Gros Morne. Thanks.